The Great Hall of the Galactic Council had never been so quiet. 347 different species sat in their designated seats, each one representing billions of lives across thousands of worlds. The chamber itself was a marvel of engineering, a massive dome floating in space where the greatest minds of the galaxy gathered to discuss matters of importance. But today, there was no discussion. There was only fear. High Arbiter stood at the central podium, his four eyes blinking one after another as he tried to find the right words. He was a species that had traveled among the stars for over 2 million years. His people had seen empires rise and fall. They had witnessed the birth of new stars and the death of old ones, but nothing in their long history had prepared them for this. "The Void Swarm has taken 17 more systems," announced, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "The is gone. The mining colonies of Sector 7 are gone. The research station at Prime is gone. Everything and everyone in those places has simply ceased to exist." A wave of anxious sounds filled the chamber. Some species clicked their mandibles. Others whistled through breathing tubes. A few simply sat in stunned silence, unable to process what they were hearing. Ambassador 9 of the Mechanical Collective rose from his seat. He was not a living being in the traditional sense, but rather a consciousness housed in a body of gleaming metal and advanced circuits. His people had abandoned organic forms millions of years ago, believing that machines were the ultimate evolution of intelligent life. They were among the beings in the galaxy, capable of running billions of calculations in the time it took other species to blink. "We have analyzed the situation from every possible angle," Nine said, his voice coming from speakers embedded in his chest. "We have run 7 billion simulations using every known variable. The result is always the same. There is no way to stop the Void Swarm. There is no way to fight them. There is no way to escape them. Given their current rate of expansion, they will consume the entire galaxy within the next 300 years. The chamber erupted into chaos. Representatives shouted over each other, demanding answers that nobody had. Some called for immediate evacuation to other galaxies. Others suggested building weapons of unimaginable power. A few simply wept, knowing that their children and would live to see the end of everything. Elder watched the panic with ancient eyes. She was one of the luminous ones, beings of pure energy who had existed since before most species had crawled out of their oceans. Her form shimmered like starlight given consciousness, beautiful and terrifying at the same time. When she spoke, her voice did not come from any physical source. Instead, it appeared directly in the minds of everyone present. "In 12 million years, my people have guided this galaxy through countless crises. We have helped young species find their way to the stars. We have prevented wars that would have destroyed entire civilizations. We have always found solutions to problems that seemed impossible, but this time we have failed. The Void Swarm exists outside of everything we understand. They should not be possible, and yet they are here. They are consuming our galaxy, and we do not know how to stop them." The admission hit the assembly like a physical blow. If the luminous ones, the oldest and beings in the galaxy, had given up hope, what chance did anyone else have? Representative of the Empire slammed his massive fist against his console, cracking the surface. They were a warrior species, standing over 3 meters tall with muscles built for combat. They had never lost a war in their entire history. The idea of an enemy they could not fight was driving mad with frustration. "Then we are simply supposed to accept death," he roared. "We are supposed to sit here and wait for the darkness to take us. I refuse. There must be something we can do." "There is nothing," replied sadly. "We have tried everything. Energy weapons pass through them without effect. Physical projectiles are absorbed before they can make contact. Our shields fail the moment they touch us. We cannot even communicate with them. They show no signs of intelligence as we understand it. They simply consume and move on." In the back of the chamber, far from the central podium where the important species sat, a small figure stood up. Liaison Officer Pemba was a species known for their quiet nature and diplomatic skills. She had been assigned to observe the council proceedings and report back to her government. She had never spoken at a full assembly before. Her heart pounded in her chest as every eye in the chamber turned toward her. "Forgive my interruption," Pemba said, her voice barely above a whisper. The acoustic systems of the chamber amplified her words so that everyone could hear. "But I believe there is one option we have not yet considered." Four eyes narrowed with suspicion. "And what option would that be, liaison officer?" Pemba took a deep breath. "The humans." For a moment there was complete silence. Then, slowly, the chamber began to fill with sounds that Pemba recognized as laughter. Different species laughed in different ways, but the meaning was universal. They thought she was joking. "The humans." His booming voice was full of disbelief. "Those primitive creatures from the outer rim. They have barely mastered basic space travel. They still fight wars among themselves over resources and ideology. What could they possibly offer that we cannot?" "I have studied their history extensively," Pemba replied, standing her ground despite the mockery. "They are a young species, yes. They have only been traveling among the stars for 500 years, and they only joined the Council 3 centuries ago. But in that short time, they have done things that should have been impossible." "Such as?" asked, his tone skeptical but curious. "There was dying. They had poisoned their own atmosphere, killed their oceans, and driven countless species to extinction. Every model predicted that they would destroy themselves within a few generations. Instead, they reversed the damage. They cleaned their air, restored their waters, and brought their planet back from the edge of death." "Environmental restoration is hardly impressive," Nine noted. "Many species have achieved similar results." "Over thousands of years, yes. The humans did it in less than 2 centuries, and that is just one example. When an asteroid threatened to destroy their world, they did not simply evacuate. They flew to the asteroid and moved it. When a disease threatened to kill millions of their people, they created a cure in less than a year. When they needed to reach their moon, they built rockets using technology so primitive that it should have been impossible to leave their atmosphere." Elder's form flickered with interest. "I have observed humanity as well. They are reckless and emotional. They make decisions based on feelings rather than logic. They are chaotic and unpredictable." "Yes," Pemba agreed, "and perhaps that is exactly what we need. We have approached this problem with logic and reason. We have used the accumulated wisdom of millions of years, and we have failed. Perhaps it is time to try something different. Perhaps it is time to call the humans." The council voted that night. It was the closest vote in recorded history, decided by a margin of only 3 species. But in the end, the decision was made. They would contact Earth and ask for help. None of them truly believed it would work. But when facing certain death, even the smallest hope was better than none at all. Admiral had served in the United Earth Fleet for 30 years. She had fought pirates in the asteroid belts. She had negotiated peace treaties with hostile alien species. She had commanded ships through storms of cosmic radiation that would have killed lesser crews. But nothing in her long career had prepared her for the message that arrived on that quiet Tuesday afternoon. She was sitting in her office at Fleet Command in Houston, drinking coffee and reading through routine patrol reports, when her communications panel lit up with a designation she had never seen before. Priority Omega. The words glowed red on her screen, demanding immediate attention. "Admiral," the voice on the other end said, "this is Ambassador Pemba of the Galactic Council. I am transmitting on behalf of the combined species of the galaxy. We have a formal request for the people of Earth." Set down her coffee cup and leaned forward in her chair. In 3 centuries of membership in the Galactic Council, Earth had never received a formal request from the combined species. They were a minor power, respected for their determination, but largely ignored when it came to matters of galactic importance. "Ambassador Pemba, this is unexpected. How can Earth help the Council?" What followed was the longest and most disturbing briefing of life. For 40 minutes she listened as Pemba explained the situation. The void swarm, the consumed systems, the failed attempts to stop them, the projections showing the complete destruction of the galaxy within 300 years. By the time Pemba finished, his coffee had gone cold and her hands were shaking slightly. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," said slowly. "The entire galaxy, including species that have been around for millions of years, cannot stop this threat, and you want us, humanity, to figure it out." "That is correct, Admiral." Was silent for a long moment. Then she reached for her communications panel and made 2 calls. Within the hour, Captain Danny and Dr. Lisa were sitting in her office, their faces showing the same mixture of confusion and concern that felt. Danny was her chief strategist, a brilliant tactical mind who had graduated top of his class from the Fleet Academy. He was young for his position, barely 40 years old, with short dark hair and sharp eyes that never seemed to miss anything. Lisa was the head of Earth's division, responsible for studying and adapting alien technology for human use. She had 3 doctoral degrees and was considered one of the scientists on the planet. Played the recording of her conversation with Pemba. When it finished, the room was silent. "This has to be a joke," Danny said finally. "Some kind of test or trick." "I thought the same thing," admitted. "But I had our intelligence division verify the transmission. It is genuine. The Council is actually asking for our help." Lisa was already pulling up data on her tablet. "They sent us their research files, all of it. 700 years of combined scientific study from over 300 species." Her eyes widened as she scrolled through the information. "This is incredible. They have technologies we have never even imagined. Dimensional manipulation, energy conversion at the quantum level, biological engineering that makes our best efforts look like children playing with blocks. And none of it works against the swarm," noted. "No, according to these reports, they have tried everything. Weapons that can destroy planets have no effect. Shields that can withstand supernova explosions fail instantly. Even their most advanced scanning technology cannot determine what the swarm actually is." Danny stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Houston skyline. Flying cars moved between the towers, following invisible traffic patterns controlled by artificial intelligence. Below, people walked through parks and plazas, going about their daily lives, completely unaware that the galaxy was facing extinction. "So what do we actually know about these things?" he asked. Lisa consulted her tablet. "The void swarm appears without warning. There is no way to predict where they will emerge. Once they appear, they consume everything in their path: matter, energy, even light itself. They leave behind only empty space, devoid of anything. No radiation, no particles, nothing. It is as if the consumed areas never existed at all." "How do they move? How do they communicate? How do they choose their targets?" "Unknown, unknown, and unknown. The Council's scientists have been studying them for centuries and have learned almost nothing." Stood and joined Danny at the window. "The galaxy's greatest minds have been working on this problem for hundreds of years and found nothing. What makes the Council think we can do better?" Danny turned to face her, and there was something in his eyes that recognized. It was the look he got when he was about to propose something that would make everyone else in the room uncomfortable. "Because we are not their greatest minds," he said slowly. "We think differently." "What do you mean?" "Look at all this research." Danny gestured toward Lisa's tablet. "It is incredibly thorough. Every experiment properly documented, every theory carefully tested, every conclusion logically supported. They approached this problem the same way they approach everything, with patience and reason and careful analysis." "That is how science works," Lisa pointed out. "That is how their science works," Danny corrected. "Human science has always been a little more chaotic. Half of our greatest discoveries were accidents. We stumble onto solutions while looking for something completely different. We try things that make no sense just to see what happens. Consider this. It was true that humanity had a reputation among the galactic community for being unpredictable. Other species made careful plans and followed them precisely. Humans made plans, threw them away when something unexpected happened, and improvised until they found something that worked. You are suggesting we approach this differently than the Council has. I am suggesting we do what humans have always done when faced with something impossible, Danny said. We refuse to accept that it is impossible. We try everything we can think of, no matter how crazy it seems. And we keep trying until something works or we die trying. Lisa looked up from her tablet. That sounds more like stubbornness than strategy. Sometimes stubbornness is the best strategy. The Council species have accepted that this problem has no solution. They have given up. They called us because they have nothing left to lose, but we have not given up. We have not even started yet. Made her decision. Assemble a team. I want the best minds humanity has to offer. Scientists, engineers, soldiers, anyone who might have a useful perspective. Tell them they have unlimited resources and one mission: save the galaxy. And if they fail, Lisa asked quietly. Smiled, though there was no humor in it. Then we will be no worse off than we are now. But I do not think they will fail. We are humans. Surviving against impossible odds is what we do best. Within a week, the team was assembled. Within 2 weeks, they were on their way to the outer territories, where the void swarm had last been detected. The galaxy held its breath and waited to see what the young species from the small blue planet would do. The Pioneer was an ugly ship. It had started life as a cargo hauler, designed to move supplies between Earth's colonies. Now it sat in orbit around a gas giant at the edge of explored space, converted into a floating laboratory filled with the strangest collection of people ever assembled. Dr. Carlos stood at the front of the main conference room, looking out at the 47 humans who had answered Admiral's call. They came from every corner of Earth and its colonies. Scientists and soldiers sat side by side with artists and philosophers. There was even a professional poker player named Rick Santos, recruited because someone had thought his ability to read patterns and bluff opponents might be useful. Watching from the corners of the room were observers from the Galactic Council. 9 of the mechanical collective stood motionless, his sensors recording everything. A warrior named had volunteered to provide security, though nobody was quite sure what he was supposed to protect them from. Ambassador Pemba sat quietly in the back, hoping that she had not made a terrible mistake by suggesting this mission. Carlos was a theoretical physicist from Ayers. He had spent his career studying things that most people considered impossible, like traveling faster than light and creating matter from pure energy. Now, he was leading a team trying to solve a problem that everyone in the galaxy had already declared unsolvable. All right, everyone, Carlos said, activating a holographic display that showed the movement patterns of the void swarm. Here is what we know. The Council species have tried every conventional approach. Energy weapons, physical projectiles, dimensional barriers, psionic attacks, even attempts at communication. Nothing has worked, so I want to hear unconventional ideas. The crazier, the better. For a moment, nobody spoke. The weight of the situation pressed down on everyone in the room. They were not just trying to solve a scientific problem. They were trying to save billions of lives across thousands of worlds. The pressure was almost unbearable. Then Dr. Park raised her hand. She was a marine biologist who had spent most of her career studying creatures in Earth's deepest oceans. Admiral had recruited her because she understood better than most how life could adapt to seemingly impossible conditions. I keep thinking about deep-sea fish, said. Some of them live in places that should kill them. No light, crushing pressure, water that is practically acid. But they survive because they found ways to adapt. Maybe the swarm is not attacking us. Maybe it is just feeding like a whale eating plankton. It does not hate the plankton. It does not even notice them as individual creatures. It just consumes because that is what it does. Carlos nodded thoughtfully, Interesting, keep going. If they are feeding, they must be processing what they consume somehow. Digestion, absorption, whatever you want to call it. There might be a moment of vulnerability during that process, a window where they are focused on breaking down what they have taken. Lieutenant Commander Jake spoke up next. He was a combat pilot with a reputation for creative tactics that drove his commanding officers crazy. He had survived situations that should have killed him by doing things that no sensible pilot would ever try. The reports say our weapons pass through them, Jake said. Everyone assumes that means they are somehow immune. But what if they are not really there at all? What if what we are seeing is just a shadow, a projection from somewhere else? Shadows of what? Asked Doctor, a quantum theorist who had been recruited because she understood the weird rules that govern particles smaller than atoms. That is the question, is it not? Maybe the real swarm exists in another dimension, and what we see is just the effect they have on our reality, like looking at a footprint and trying to figure out what made it. The discussion continued for hours. Ideas flew around the room like sparks from a fire. Some were immediately dismissed as impossible. Others were added to a growing list of experiments to try. Nobody laughed at any suggestion, no matter how strange it sounded. They had all accepted that the solution, if one existed, would probably not be anything conventional. Rick Santos had been quiet for most of the session. He sat in his chair with his arms crossed, watching the others talk with the same focused attention he used when reading opponents at a poker table. Finally, he spoke up. "You know what nobody has tried," Rick said, giving them what they want. Carlos turned to look at him. They want to consume everything. Do they, or do they just take what is available because it is there? Rick leaned forward. Think about it. They appear somewhere. They eat everything around them. Then they move on to somewhere else. They are not hunting specific targets. They are not following any pattern that the Council has been able to identify. They just eat whatever is in front of them. So, Jake asked, so what if we gave them something better? Something they wanted more than inhabited planets? If you want to move a hungry dog, you do not try to push it. You hold out a piece of meat and let it follow you. His eyes lit up with sudden understanding. A lure. You want to create a lure for the void swarm. Exactly. We cannot fight them. The Council has proven that. We cannot hide from them because they are spreading everywhere. But maybe we can redirect them. Lead them somewhere they cannot hurt anyone. Nine's mechanical voice cut through the excited murmurs. This approach was considered and rejected by the Council Scientific Committee 412 years ago. The swarm shows no preference for any type of matter or energy. They consume everything equally. With respect, Carlos said, the Council's experiments were designed to find a way to destroy the swarm. They were looking for weaknesses to exploit. We are looking for something different. We want to understand what attracts them. There is no evidence that anything attracts them. There is no evidence because nobody has looked for it. Everyone has been too focused on fighting them to consider other options. Stood up and walked to the holographic display. We need to run experiments, offer the swarm different things and see how they react. Maybe there is something they prefer, even if the preference is slight. If we can find that, we can use it. The Council will not approve such experiments, Nine warned. They would consider it too dangerous. You would be deliberately attracting the swarm. Then we will not ask for approval, Carlos said simply. We will do it ourselves and tell them about it after we have results. The alien observers exchanged looks that might have been concern or confusion. Human logic was strange to them. The Council had spent centuries trying to avoid the swarm, and here were humans planning to fly toward them on purpose. Pemba spoke for the first time. The Council gave you unlimited resources and authority. Technically, you do not need approval for any experiments you wish to conduct. Good, Carlos said. Then let us get started. We have a galaxy to save and no time to waste asking permission. Over the next few weeks, The Pioneer became the center of the strangest scientific study in galactic history. The humans flew their ship into the path of smaller swarm tendrils and released various substances to see what would happen. They tried different types of matter, different energy signatures, different combinations of elements. Most of the time, the swarm ignored their offerings and continued on its original path. But sometimes, just sometimes, the darkness shifted slightly toward what they had released. And in those small reactions, the humans began to find something that no one else had discovered in 700 years. They were finding a pattern. The experiment that changed everything happened on the 32nd day of their mission. The Pioneer was tracking a small tendril of the void swarm, keeping a safe distance while releasing test materials into its path. They had tried dozens of substances already, from simple hydrogen gas to complex organic compounds. The reactions had been minimal at best. Carlos stood at the control console, watching the sensor readings with tired eyes. He had barely slept in days. None of them had. The pressure of knowing that billions of lives depended on their work made rest feel like a luxury they could not afford. "Preparing to release exotic matter sample," announced from her station. "This is the last of our synthesized supply. If this does not work, we will need to wait 3 weeks for more." "Understood," Carlos replied. "Release when ready." Exotic matter was rare and difficult to produce. It existed in the spaces between normal particles, breaking rules that governed ordinary matter. The Council had tried using it as a weapon centuries ago, hoping that its strange properties might affect the swarm. The attempt had failed, and they had moved on to other approaches. But the humans were not trying to hurt the swarm. They were trying to interest it. The canister launched from the Pioneer's hold, drifting toward the approaching darkness. Sensors tracked its position as it came within range of the tendril. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the readings changed. "The tendril is altering course," reported, her voice tight with excitement. "It is moving toward the exotic matter release point." Carlos leaned forward. "How significant is the deviation?" 3 degrees. That is 10 times stronger than any reaction we have seen before. The swarm tendril reached the exotic matter and consumed it along with everything else within several kilometers. Then it continued on its original path, as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. For the first time in 700 years of study, someone had found something that the void swarm actually wanted. The next few days were a blur of activity. Carlos called a meeting to discuss what they had learned and what it might mean. The room was crowded with tired faces, but everyone's eyes were bright with hope. "Exotic matter," explained, pulling up diagrams on the holographic display. "The swarm reacted to it more strongly than anything else we have tested, not by much, but enough to measure. If we had more of it, we might be able to use it to influence their movement." "The synthesis process takes weeks," Jake pointed out. "And even with every production facility on Earth working at full capacity, we could not make enough to matter. The swarm is enormous." "Then we need a natural source," Rick said. "Somewhere exotic matter occurs without being manufactured." Nodded. "There are a few options. Neutron star collisions produce exotic matter, but those are rare and unpredictable. Black hole accretion disks contain trace amounts, but getting close enough to collect them would be suicide. Certain types of supernovae release it during the explosion itself." "None of those are practical," Carlos said, frustrated. "There is one more option." Pulled up a new image showing a dim, barely visible object floating in space. "Brown dwarfs. They are failed stars, too small to ignite nuclear fusion but large enough to have compressed matter in their cores. Some of them contain significant amounts of exotic matter, trapped under billions of years of pressure." Studied the image. "How many brown dwarfs are there in the galaxy?" "Billions. They are everywhere. Most star systems have at least 1 or 2. Nobody pays attention to them because they are useless. Cold, dark, empty." Until now, Rick said slowly. If we could crack one open and release that exotic matter, it would be like ringing a dinner bell for the swarm. They would come running from across the galaxy. That would be incredibly dangerous, Nine interjected. You would be summoning the swarm deliberately. If anything went wrong, you would be responsible for accelerating the destruction of the galaxy. And if we do nothing, the galaxy gets destroyed anyway, Jake replied. At least this way we are trying something. Carlos was packing now, his mind racing through possibilities. We do not just want to attract them to one location, we want to move them. If we crack a brown dwarf here, they come. Then we crack another one further out, and another. We lead them like following a trail of breadcrumbs. Lead them where? Pemba asked. Away, out of the galaxy, into the void between galaxies where there is nothing to consume, millions of light years of empty space. By the time they realize there is nothing there, they will be so far away that it would take them millions of years to return. The room fell silent as everyone processed the idea. It was bold. It was crazy. It was exactly the kind of plan that only humans would come up with. This is insane, Nine said. You cannot simply herd a cosmic horror like livestock. Why not? Carlos asked. We herd animals on Earth all the time. Find what they want, use it to lead them where we want them to go. The principle is the same, just on a larger scale. A much larger scale. That is why humans invented engineering, to make large-scale things possible. The debate continued for hours. Every objection was met with a proposed solution. Every problem was analyzed until a workaround was found. By the end, they had the rough outline of a plan. Operation Shepherd, as they called it, would require resources on a scale never before attempted. Ships capable of cracking open brown dwarfs. A precise schedule of releases, time to keep the swarm moving in the right direction. Coordination across thousands of light years of space. And most importantly, people brave enough or foolish enough to fly toward the thing that had consumed entire civilizations. Carlos transmitted their proposal to Admiral on Earth. She reviewed it with her staff, made a few modifications, and forwarded it to the Galactic Council with humanity's official recommendation. The Council's response came within hours. Elder herself addressed the human team directly, her energy form appearing in the Pioneers' conference room. In 12 million years, we have never seen a plan like this, she said. It goes against every principle of caution and self-preservation that has guided galactic civilization. It is reckless, dangerous, and based on incomplete data. Carlos braced himself for rejection. We approve it unanimously, continued. The Council recognizes that caution has failed us. Perhaps it is time to try recklessness instead. You have whatever resources you need. The fate of the galaxy is in your hands, humans. Do not fail us. As her image faded, the humans looked at each other with a mixture of excitement and terror. They had convinced the galaxy to let them try the impossible. Now they actually had to do it. Operation Shepherd began on a Tuesday by Earth's calendar, though the date had no meaning this far from home. Admiral commanded the mission from the flagship Endurance, a battle cruiser that had been modified to carry the specialized equipment needed to crack open brown dwarfs. Around her flew a fleet of 500 ships, 200 from Earth and 300 volunteered by Council species who wanted to be part of the effort. The first target was a brown dwarf designated HD 4879, a cold, dark object about 300 light years from the nearest void swarm concentration. Jake piloted the lead cracking vessel, a small but powerful ship named the Shepherd. He had volunteered for the most dangerous job because he believed someone had to go first, and he trusted his own flying skills more than anyone else's. Approaching target, Jake reported over the communications channel, beginning descent into the atmosphere. The brown dwarf was enormous, much larger than any planet but not quite a star. Its surface was a swirling mass of cold gases, dark reds and deep purples moving in patterns that had repeated for billions of years. Somewhere beneath that surface, trapped in the compressed core, was the exotic matter they needed. Payload armed, Jake continued, his voice steady despite the danger. Deploying penetration device in 30 seconds. The penetration device was a marvel of human engineering, created in record time by scientists and engineers working around the clock. It would drill through the outer layers of the brown dwarf and detonate in the core, releasing the exotic matter in a burst that sensors across the galaxy would detect. 20 seconds, 15, 10. Jake's finger hovered over the release button. Everything they had worked for came down to this moment. If the theory was wrong, if the swarm did not respond, then they had no backup plan. This was humanity's only idea. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 deploying. The payload dropped from the shepherd's hold, accelerating toward the swirling surface below. Jake pulled up hard, climbing away from the brown dwarf as fast as his engines could push him. Behind him, the device disappeared into the atmosphere. For several long seconds, nothing happened. Then the surface of the brown dwarf began to crack. Deep fissures spread across the failed star, glowing with light that had been trapped inside for billions of years. The cracks widened, merged, and finally broke open in a massive eruption of exotic matter and energy. The flash was visible to sensors across the entire galaxy. On 100,000 worlds, astronomers looked up from their instruments in shock. Something had just happened that had never occurred in natural history. A brown dwarf had been cracked open by intelligent design. Payload deployed successfully, Jake reported, his voice tight with relief. Returning to fleet position. Now they waited. The first signs of swarm movement came within hours. Tendrils that had been advancing toward populated systems slowed, stopped, and turned. Like rivers changing course, they began flowing toward the source of the exotic matter release. Sensors tracked their movement in real time, sending data to every ship in the fleet. "It is working," whispered from her station on the Pioneer. "They are actually coming." Over the following days, the operation expanded. Crack teams moved from brown dwarf to brown dwarf, always staying ahead of the approaching swarm, always leading it further from inhabited space. The schedule was precise, calculated by Nine and his mechanical collective colleagues. One mistake, one miscalculation in timing could mean disaster. On the 14th day, disaster nearly found them. A cracking vessel named the Beacon cut its timing too close. The swarm reached the release point before the crew could escape. Captain Maria Santos and her team of 12 became the first casualties of Operation Shepherd. Their sacrifice was noted in the logs and mourned by their colleagues, but there was no time to stop. The mission continued. More losses followed. A navigation error sent 2 ships into the path of an unexpected swarm tendril. An engine failure stranded a crew too close to a release point. By the end of the first month, 47 humans had given their lives for the operation. Each loss was painful, but none of the survivors considered giving up. Too much depended on their success. On the Pioneer, made a discovery that changed their understanding of what they were dealing with. She had been studying the sensor data obsessively, looking for any pattern that might help them predict swarm behavior. What she found was something no one had expected. "They are not just feeding," she announced during a briefing. "They are reproducing." Carlos looked up from his calculations. "What do you mean?" "Watch the energy patterns when they consume the exotic matter." Pulled up a visual representation on the display. "See how the signature changes. They are splitting, creating more of themselves. That is why they keep spreading. They are looking for fuel to make more swarm." Jake's face went pale. "Then we have been making things worse. Every brown dwarf we crack gives them more energy to reproduce." "No," shook her head firmly. "We have been controlling it. Before they were spreading randomly, consuming everything they encountered. Now they are concentrated, focused on our releases. Yes, there are more of them, but they are all moving in the same direction, toward the galactic rim, toward empty space. So we are not just leading them away, Rick said slowly. We are giving them exactly what they want, a path to follow, fuel to consume, room to grow. Away from everything we care about, confirmed. By the time they reach intergalactic space, they will have grown beyond anything we can imagine, but they will be out there, not in here. The final phase of Operation Shepherd took place at the galaxy's edge, in a region of space so far from any inhabited world that light from the nearest star took millions of years to reach it. A chain of 17 brown dwarfs had been identified, leading from the rim into the void between galaxies. Admiral watched from the Endurance as the cracking teams worked their way along the chain. Each release drew the swarm further out, further from everything they had been trying to consume. The darkness followed the trail of exotic matter like a hungry animal following a scent. The final brown dwarf cracked open just as the last tendrils of the swarm crossed the galactic boundary. For a moment, the light of the release illuminated the edge of the Milky Way, a final beacon marking the end of the threat that had terrified the galaxy for centuries. Sensors confirm, the tactical officer reported. All swarm concentrations have exited the galaxy. They are continuing outward into intergalactic space, following the residual exotic matter trail. The bridge of the Endurance erupted in cheers. On ships throughout the fleet, humans and aliens alike celebrated. The impossible had been achieved. The void swarm had been herded out of the galaxy like cattle being moved to new pasture. Elder's image appeared on the main. Her energy form glowed brighter than had ever seen it, as if the ancient being was experiencing joy for the first time in eons. In 12 million years, we have never witnessed anything like this, said. Younger species are supposed to learn from their elders. Today, every species in the galaxy learned from humanity. You did not defeat the swarm through superior technology or ancient wisdom. You did it through creativity, stubbornness, and a complete refusal to accept that something was impossible. Smiled, exhaustion and pride mixing in equal measure. We just did what humans have always done. We figured it out as we went along. That is precisely what makes your species remarkable. You do not know what cannot be done, and so you do it anyway. In the weeks that followed, humanity's status in the galaxy changed forever. The Galactic Council elevated Earth to senior advisory status, giving humans a permanent seat on the High Chamber. A new protocol was established for future crises, encoded into the Council's fundamental procedures. When we do not know what to do next, we call the humans. On Earth, in Houston, Dr. Lisa stood at her office window, watching the sun set over a world that would now continue to exist because of what they had accomplished. Her tablet beeped with a message from Ambassador Pemba. "Thank you," it read simply, "for everything." Lisa smiled and looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, beyond the edge of the galaxy, the void swarm continued its journey into the emptiness between galaxies. It would grow and spread, but it would never threaten the Milky Way again. And somewhere on a small blue planet, humanity returned to their normal lives. They argued and created, fought and loved, continued being wonderfully, impossibly human, ready for whatever impossible challenge the universe would throw at them next. Because if the galaxy had learned one thing from this experience, it was that there was no problem too big, no threat too terrifying, and no situation too hopeless for humanity to face. All you had to do was call.